Welcome back to the Top Notch Documentaries YouTube channel. In today's serial killer series video, I shall be going over the case of serial killer Robert Hansen. I hope you enjoy. 1970s and 1980s were a major point in Alaskan history. During this time period, the Trans-Alaskan oil pipeline led many to relocate to Alaska, with Anchorage becoming a much more populated area. Shady activity would soon become apparent. The influx of a transient population likely helped today's serial killer avoid early apprehension. In the 1970s and the 1980s, Robert Hansen contributed to the disappearances of young women, many never being reported missing, assumed to have moved back to their original home state. It was July 8th of 1980 in Seward, Alaska, that a woman's body would be found in a remote wilderness area. Seward is located on the Kenai Peninsula. The region is vast, like much of Alaska. The naked woman's body would be uncovered by highway maintenance workers. The body had been buried, hidden in a mouldy sleeping bag. The building of a new road had led to the discovery. It was now in plain sight, and police were alerted. Given that this was Alaska, and the crime scene location was way out into the wilderness, police response time must have been slow. I say this because, by the time that police arrived, the crime scene had been contaminated. Police showed up just in time to witness a bear consuming the body at the crime scene. The quick decision was made to shoot the bear in order to avoid losing further crucial forensic evidence. The victim was determined to have died via a .223 rifle round. Investigators would then identify the victim through fingerprint records. Her name was Joanna Messina. She was from Seward, Alaska. Joanna had told friends that she was meeting a man who had promised to take her on a shopping expedition. She worked as a prostitute, and this, along with the wilderness location, began to help authorities piece together a possible suspect profile. The rifle round used to murder Joanna was commonly used by hunters to bring down larger animals. It seemed like overkill. Killing a woman with a round used to kill large animals just reflected the killer's perspective that the women were just the same as big game, just another target. Investigators believed that the high-powered rifle was put to deadly use as their killer stalked Joanna through the desolate wilderness, taking his time to prolong her inevitable fate prior to shooting her. Joanna's body had then been dragged over to a burial spot. Another victim, known as Eklutna Annie, Eklutna is 150 miles north of Seward, had eerily similar connections to Joanna Messina. She was likely a prostitute given her fur coat and high-heel boots. Plus, Eklutna Annie's remains were found along a service road frequented by local hunters. The crime scene had long since been interrupted. Animals had devoured her remains, and only bones remained. Native American jewellery was also located near to her body, but no identification was found. She had died in the same violent manner as Joanna Messina and had been buried. It's progressed with no more case leads. Who was their killer? Many of the investigators suspected a singular individual to be responsible for both murders, but it wouldn't be until 2 years later that more human remains would be found. They bore the same exact features as Joanna Messina and Eklutna Annie. It was September the 13th of 1982. Two hunters who were actually part of the police force would stumble upon another partially buried body alongside the Knik River. 3 rifle rounds had impacted the victim's back, but the victim's clothing showed no signs of impact. She had been redressed after her murder. A bandage-style blindfold still around her eyes. The sight really illustrated to everyone that it was the same sadistic killer. He had hunted the woman down, and through dental records, she was soon identified as Sherry Morrow. The similarities between the now 3 murder cases only continued as investigators discovered a .223 rifle casing at the scene. Sherry worked as a dancer and had been missing for close to a year. Supposed to meet a man for a photography session, she was offered $300. She was never heard from again. Investigators knew that a serial killer had free rein in Alaska. A skilled hunter was probably their murderer. Given that this was the early 1980s, access to the desolate regions would have been tricky via car. Without knowledge of the landscape and accessibility via plane or boat, it would have been challenging for their killer to successfully bring the victim to the wilderness and then proceed with his disturbing plan. He was evidently comfortable in the wilderness. Still, the widely believed suspect profile didn't narrow down any likely offenders. Plenty of those who frequented the red light district, where two of the women, and presumably Eklutna Annie, were known to work, interacted with hunters. Alaskans make up a large majority of gun owners in the United States also, so owning a rifle wouldn't be what nailed their killer. What would nail him would be if they found his own rifle. Rounds used to kill Joanna Messina, and more recently Sherry Morrow, were determined to be from the same rifle. Investigators could only wait, as they knew that their killer would soon strike out again. He was clearly enjoying the crimes and had been active for some time. The time gap between victim discoveries only put forth the theory that there was still plenty of undiscovered bodies out in the Alaskan wilderness. 9 months after Sherry was unearthed, by now it was June the 13th of 1983, a major break in the case arrived unexpectedly. Cindy Paulson was picked up by a trucker close to a private airfield in Anchorage. She was terrified and handcuffed, claiming that a man was chasing her. The trucker drove Cindy to the police station, and Cindy recounted a shocking experience. Cindy worked as a prostitute and was given an offer of $200 by a John for services. During the encounter, the John attached a handcuff to Cindy and demanded that she cooperate. He kidnapped her and drove her to his residence on the east side of Anchorage, chained her in his basement overnight, and repeatedly sexually assaulted her. She feared for her life. The kidnapper bit into her breasts and sexually assaulted her with the handle of a hammer. The following day, the man restrained her in his car and drove her to a private airfield where he had a small plane. He claims that he's going to take Cindy into the wilderness. Evidently horrified by the whole ordeal, and knowing that this may be her last chance for a successful break, Cindy managed to escape whilst her abductor was loading equipment into his plane. Fortunately, the restraints are only confined to Cindy and not inside the abductor's car. Cindy is asked about a suspect description and recounts this, describing the kidnapper as having a crater face. She even remembers the address of the suspect's own residence. Investigators become much more confident that this is their serial killer. The details surrounding the missing women make much more sense given the plane and Cindy's description of the suspect home. She described his basement as containing hunting trophies. Cindy has a great memory evidently, and is taken back to the private airfield to point out the suspect's plane. Upon pointing it out, a prime suspect is connected to that very plane. He was 44-year-old local and named Robert Hansen. Hansen was married with 2 kids and attended church weekly, a well-respected community figure. He was most known for running Hansen Bakery, and everyone liked him. However, Hansen had a hidden dark side. A bit of background on Robert Hansen. Hansen was from Iowa. He had a stutter which stayed with him into adulthood, plus he had severe acne scarring. He wasn't good looking and used hunting and shooting as a means to cope with social rejection, since his peers made fun of him and girls weren't interested. In his school yearbook, he realised that the school had even spelt his own name wrong. A low self-esteem and hatred for people, mainly women, seemed to grow within Hansen. He focused much of his time on his shooting and hunting hobby, which soon evolved into an obsession for Hansen. He was skilled using rifles and bows, and earned trophies for marksmanship, which would be put into deadly use later on, as he grew to hate women. He would work at his parents' bakery, earning about $1 a day, and this was from the age of 10. At age 21, he committed arson and was caught. He burned down his school bus garage. He was one of the first responders to the scene also, since he was a volunteer fireman at this time. He described this act against the school as retribution for perceived abuses. He served 20 months of prison time and eventually moved to Anchorage along with his second wife and his 2 children. At the time, Anchorage offered benefits for its residents, plus it was an ideal place for Hansen to engage in his hobby of hunting. More incarceration time followed him in Alaska, as he was convicted for sex crimes and other theft charges. Hansen is approached about the abduction of Cindy and denies any knowledge of meeting her. He said that she wasn't credible and showed his true colours when he made the comment that you can't R-word a prostitute. Hansen gave a supported alibi, his friends confirming that he'd been with them during Cindy's abduction and confinement. Unconvinced about Hansen being innocent, he was put under surveillance. Hansen went about his daily business, but during this time, more bodies were found in the Alaskan wilderness. On October the 27th of 1983, a search of Hansen's home was authorised. Hansen was taken into custody at his bakery. The search at Hansen's home was conducted, and a secret, soundproof room which matched Cindy's confinement story was uncovered. The house was seemingly immaculate. However, a map with 21 X's was located. It had been hidden, much like the secret room, in the home. 3 of these matched the locations of victims previously mentioned. In a white canvas bag, a necklace belonging to Sherry was found, along with newspaper clippings of victims and ID cards. Hansen's rifle, a Mini 14 rifle, was also located. He had used it to kill most of the women. Hansen confessed to 17 murders and accepted a plea deal to help authorities locate other missing, murdered women. They soon found 14 in total. Hansen was given 461 years, plus a life sentence. He had likely been active since 1971. Thankfully, Hansen is now gone from this earth. He could be involved in as many as 37 murders of innocent women. I hope you enjoyed the video. As always, thanks for watching.